Hi everyone, this is my cut flower plan. Starting with my layout, I wanted to keep things fairly simple here. On the top, I imagine that this is where my house is going to be, okay? It's going to act as a north-facing windbreak, and so really, there's not going to be any south-facing winds, so I decided on a east windbreak and a west windbreak on either side that's about 3 feet in length and about 4 feet high. I divided my plot into 6 sections, which really are more like 3 sections with how I grouped them. Um, the topmost one, where you see the salvia, astilbe, the salix, and the viburnum, those are all perennials, so I'm not going to have to do a lot of digging and disrupt any roots. They also have similar fertilization needs. Below that, those are my annuals and my filler of the millet. Um, and in the bottom are my low tunnels, which I installed to have a sizable season extension. My first plant, which I chose as for an annual, is my Orange Queen Improved Celosia. The common name is coxcomb. It doesn't need any seed pre-treatment, and you're just going to plop the seeds right down surface level. Only takes 5 to 7 days to germinate, and you want to keep it in a greenhouse 70 to 80 degrees when you're doing so. First full sun, and it doesn't need, but it benefits from grow through netting just so the flower crowns don't get too heavy. And for more bushy growth, you're going to want to push it around 6 to 12 inches. It also just requires about moderate fertilization. This is still chinensis, milk and honey, is what I chose originally as my perennial flower. Its common name is Astilbe. I guess people call it false spirea, and I've also, when I was looking it up, also false goat's beard, but I've never heard it called that. I've just heard it called Astilbe. Um, this plant is one of the two, I should say, that I would consider buying as a liner and not growing from seed because it takes 6 to 8 weeks to cold stratify, 28 to 35 days to germinate once you surface sow it, and that's just it is very intense and it'd take up a lot of greenhouse space for a really long time. Besides that, though, for the rest of the description, um, it likes partial shade. That's why I have it next to my viburnum, and it doesn't require any support or pinching since it just is a single stem flower. Doesn't really get super bushy if you pinch it or anything. And this also requires heavy fertilization. I also should say here, I didn't put a part in my description for whether or not I'm doing some succession planting because for most of these I am, but Silby, I want to mention that I'm not doing succession planting because it's kind of like a lilac where it just blooms for like 1 week out of the year. And a possible workaround, which I didn't include, but I thought about was that I could get different cultivars of Astilbe besides milk and honey and kind of like strategically pick them out so I have more time of the year where I'm getting a Stilby, but that's just an afterthought more than anything else. For my filler crop, I chose the ornamental grass purple millet or Panicum millasium variation violaceum. Um, Common name purple millet. I mean, it's pretty basic. Soak this one overnight before you plant it. Plant it about a quarter inch deep. Um, 3 to 10 days to germinate, 70 to 75 degrees in the greenhouse. It likes full sun, doesn't need any support or pinching, and it only needs moderate fertilizer. Nothing fun to say about this except, isn't that pretty? What a nice grass. For my vegetable, I got a little creative and chose red burgundy okra, or Abelmoschus esculentus. So red okra, it's got a very beautiful flower, and the main reason, however, I chose this plant was its seed pods and drying them. So common name, red okra. You want to soak the seeds overnight before you plant it and plant it about a half inch deep. It takes 7 to 12 days to germinate, 1 to 2 weeks. And you want a hotter temperature during the day, colder temperature during the night, and full sun for this plant. You also want to stake it. It gets really tall. You want to start pinching it when it gets to 24 inches. And it has moderate fertilization requirements. The one key thing that I have to say about this plant is ethylene, and that okra pods release a lot of ethylene, so you're going to want to keep this away from other plants when you store it. So the final plant out of my original five is my herb, where I chose Salvia sclerea, or clary sage. Now, on an earlier slide, I said that my astilbe was grown next to my viburnum, but I meant to say my salvia, so I'm just clarifying that right now. Anyways, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks to cold stratify this plant. It's also a perennial, so it's in my top row. You just plant it about surface level again. It needs sunlight. 14 to 30 days to germinate, 65 to 70 degrees in the greenhouse during that time, and it prefers full sun. Once it starts budding, you're going to want to stake it, and you're going to want to pinch the growing tips of seedlings for better growth. And this only needs light fertilization, which is why I have it next to the, viburnum, because viburnum you really don't need to fertilize at all. The astilbe has moderate fertilization, and it's next to the salix because of that. So yeah, sorry to make that mistake. I'm just clarifying it here. So as pretty much everything except the salvia are moderate or heavy feeders, I plan to do a winter cover crop of legumes so I could really provide a lot of that nitrogen. I'd probably choose something like hairy vetch since it provides some nitrogen, and it also won't overload my annuals since a lot of them are sensitive to too much nitrogen. So hairy vetch seemed like the best choice there. Everywhere minus where I plan to grow the salvia, I am going to supplement with liquid fertilizer every week. I decided on doing every week because I'm going for looks, and that's the same thing I did at my job at the Botanic Gardens, where we fertilized every single week to keep the flowers looking good. It's a lot, and it's a bit of a investment, but I think that it pays off because I mean it's a flower business. You want your flowers to look good. I also should mention I didn't choose a foliar application because our summers here in Illinois are really rainy, and I'm right north of Chicago, and they call it the windy season for a reason. So for weed management, I do a mixture. I took this from the Penn State article, but I do a mixture of having a cover crop and also burning every other year. So burning too often, I learned in another class, can really damage the nutrient availability in your soil. But every other year, every couple years can be really beneficial actually, and increase the amount of besides just managing weeds and pests, it actually increases the uptake of certain nutrients. Um, Besides that, you're always going to get weeds, and either hand removing them using Roundup, or I was thinking getting one of those spot blow torches that you could use for that. So as you kind of saw in my layout, my overwintering section is pretty big. I wanted to have a really big like season extension area, and then I could bring them inside the greenhouse once it gets a little too chilly. Because I'm in northern Illinois, and we only have 170 days in our growing season. Our first freeze date is right around October 21st, and our last 10-hour day is the 28th of October. So I couldn't figure out how to get all the labels in, so I'm just going to read them out to you. Hopefully your flower ID is good. So I have Helichrysum. I have, and sorry, Antarinum, Ranunculus, and Tanacetum. So my two woody ornamentals I chose were Viburnum triobum and Salix caprea. So Viburnum triobum, it's actually a funny story. The reason I wanted to incorporate this plant into my plan is because when I was a child, my dad had me taste. It's also known as a high bush cranberry, by the way. And my dad had me taste some high bush cranberries that he saw, and it is probably the second or third worst thing I've ever tasted in my life. They're horrendous. Um, but it grows in my area, and it's a very hardy perennial that I decided to choose. I think the berries and the red foliage looks especially good in the fall and could make a good and look good in bouquets. Also, should mention, um, what's it called? The berries do produce ethylene. The second one is Salix caprea or dwarf pussy willow is what it's called. These I'm gonna have two of. You need to actually graft a scion of this onto a more hardy rootstock in my area, I found out. But both of these materials, I should say, are going to be for um, like dry material in my arrangements. And the dwarf pussy willow, what was it? Oh yeah, it needs two plants to cross pollinate, which is why you see in my layout that there's two of them. Yeah. So my post-harvest plan. So generally, you want to harvest stuff either early in the morning or the evening. I would say that the morning is almost always the best time to do this because you don't want to harvest all your flowers and then late at night go in and have to process them all. It's very time consuming. So I would choose to do this in the morning. First, you want to harvest your plant with clean pruners or snippers. Pruners are a lot of the time, my choice because snippers can more tough material is very hard to get through with snippers. So, and the light material you get through just the same with pruners. So I would use those. Then remove any excess foliage. For any plants that aren't going to dry, stems. For most of the plants, you're going to want to place them in a bucket of clean water. Plants that will be dried will be put in a separate empty container. Secondly, you want to, before processing, separate your plants into groups, whether you're drying them or putting them in cold storage, or if they're one of the plants that you're storing, but it is can't survive in cold storage. So from this point, I think that the best way to do this is to recut your stems of each plant again underwater, just because that way you could at least try to prevent embolism and get your flowers to last longer than just cutting them right away, placing them in water. That you probably already have embolism at that point. So it's always a smart idea to try to cut stems again underwater, and then placing them in cold water with floral preservative. Next, my Astilbe, Salvia, and Celosia all benefit from the stems being seared in boiling water for a couple seconds. So before moving them into their permanent storage, I'll do that. So from here, I just need to put my plants in storage. And for that, I'm going to need two coolers, one set to 38 degrees and one to 48 degrees. I'd get the one set to 48 degrees. Maybe I'd get a real small refrigerator for this because the millet, salvia, the astilbe are all going to be kept in the colder container where the celosia is kind of sensitive to cold and it'd have to be kept in a warmer one. So for sanitation, this is very important. You want to clean your buckets at least weekly. And to keep it humid, you can run humidifiers, which will also have to be cleaned weekly. The dry plants are just going to be bundled and hung upside down in a cool, well, actually not cool, but like a dark, dry room with good airflow. I mean, I guess 60 to 70 degrees. I would consider that warm personally, but yeah. So a few key things I just want to state is the fresh okra pods and viburnum berries produce ethylene, so harvesting them alongside other flowers is a bad idea. You're going to want to harvest them on their own, even though they're going to be dried. Um, Storing them together is fine. Once you apply like ethyl block to your flowers, um, but you just want to be careful about that. And finally, keep an eye on your plants. Go in there and monitor every day. Look for pests or make sure moisture levels are okay and your refrigeration system's working as intended. And just stay ahead of things here. So finally, I'd like to go over just how I'm going to market my products. So my three ideas, farmers market, retail florist, and cut flower subscription. So for the farmers market, it's really great for entry level. You can really build a lot of relationships with your customers. Um, Disadvantages, especially here in Illinois, is that, I remember in the lecture they mentioned how wind was really the only problem. You guys don't get a lot of rain there in Colorado. Here, we get a lot of rain, especially recently. Climate change has really been kicking our butts here. And if you get a storm, it could ruin your whole week's plans and like how much, however much money you would have made if you get rained out, you aren't making that. Um, to go over retail florists, selling to like a retail florist, I mean, you can sell everything in bulk. You don't have to focus about retailing stuff yourself, which is, those are all both huge benefits. But, selling in bulk is less profitable and you're just going to get outcompeted by people with who could grow more than you because they can afford to sell in bulk easier that way. And also, you might have to, I might have to scratch this entire plan and do something to meet the demands of my local florist. Um, Finally, though, re, cut flower subscriptions. These are really cool. My friend's mom actually has one of these. It's really consistent revenue for her. She has an established customer base because she used to cut hair. She knows a lot of people, and she's able to market to them. Um, you also are able to kind of know how many flowers you're going to need to sell ahead of time with this method, since you're going to have so many customers and maybe grow so much extra in case you get more customers. But this way you really can calculate how much you're going to need to grow, which saves you money in the long run. Some disadvantages though is, transporting your cut flowers is takes a lot of time to figure out the logistics. I mean, you're either going to have to deliver them yourself or outsource that, which can possibly cost you a lot of money. And also, especially if you're growing sensitive flowers, that could be very challenging. But those are my three options I would consider, though.